Let's do Grizzlies Timberwolves, which I'm infinitely interested to watch as sort of two teams on the come up.
Yeah.
That I guess the Timberwolves basically met expectations this year. They probably exceeded them a little bit, but the Grizzlies obliterated them. I even said on the last podcast with I forget who I was recording with, I'm never picking a Grizzlies over under again because I'm just going to be fucking wrong. I'm the inverse of whatever that team is actually doing. I'm putting it here because I actually don't know that it's going to be as competitive as some people are painting it out to be. And I'm just curious as your initial thoughts on the Timberwolves Grizzlies matchup or Patrick Beverley's revenge tour part two after beating the Clippers.
Yeah, it's hard to get a read on this series because these teams just feel like they're going to present a bunch of matchup problems for one another. And, seeing how they adjust mid-series is going to be really interesting. Like, do they have to start Pat Bev to just, continue shutting down Ja Morant or trying to do their best to shut down Ja Morant? Or do they keep going with, Vando and McDaniels and then Edwards, Towns, Russell? Memphis at least has some defensive personnel, particularly Dillon Brooks, who you figure is probably going to go on Anthony Edwards at first. But how does Ja contain D'Angelo Russell? If that's the matchup, where does Desmond Bane go? How, are they going to try to stretch out Steven Adams with Karl Anthony Towns, or does Jaren Jackson Jr. go on Towns? Does he have the size to contend with Towns in the post? There's a lot of mismatch potential here on both sides, which should make a really entertaining series, I hope.
Yeah, I think the main concern and my biggest question for this series, I'm very interested to see how Memphis's offense translates to the postseason. And maybe the Timberwolves aren't the perfect opponent to test this out, but just a team that relies on getting out in transition, hitting the offensive glass, and then having Ja Morant, basically, with these moments sprinkled in from Jaren Jackson Jr. on the ball, Desmond Bane, and all that. It doesn't feel postseason proof. I'm wondering if this is like the team to test it out against. I know Minnesota's defense has been up and down like kind of all year, and they're not the best in the half court. And so maybe that's the team to sort of go up against in this situation. But I'm just very curious when you look at like Memphis is so deep. And I do think one of the things that we underrate leading into the postseason is depth. And we kind of just inadvertently touched upon why when you look at like what's going on with the Bulls and the Bucks in certain instances. Minnesota's done a great job getting back in transition after they make mistakes, but when they're missing shots, like that's Memphis's opportunity to get out and run. And I would expect them to seize every chance they get to do that. I'm still just the overarching style is something that is my biggest question. Like it's one of the biggest questions of the playoffs for me, not even my biggest question of this series.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated because, you mentioned like Memphis loves to get out and run. Both of these teams actually rank really high in terms of opponent turnovers. So, I think Minnesota was third in steals per game and led the league in opponent turnovers. Memphis is first in steals per game and third in opponent turnovers. So both teams like to get out and run. I guess it's like, with certain matchups as to which team can impose their style upon the other. Both of these teams kind of like to play the same style. So it might not be, who can impose their style upon the other. It's just who can play their style better than the opponent, who can be more careful with the ball, who can, as you mentioned, who can attack the glass to the extent that, they typically do. Memphis led the league in offensive rebounds. Minnesota was pretty good on the offensive glass, not as great on the defensive. So that seems like an area of potential concern for them, especially, given the size that Memphis has in their front court.
Do you think, and I guess this, and if you have another, I didn't ask you if you had any big questions about the last series. So if you have a big defining question, please throw it out there. But you mentioned this about Towns. We saw in the matchups that I saw between these teams, there was a lot of Jaren Jackson Jr. on Karl Anthony Towns. Do you think that persuades the Grizzlies to tilt towards more Triple J at the 5, especially in this setting? Or do you think, I love Jaden McDaniels, I love Jared Vanderbilt, but do those actually give you a way to work having two bigs, like one of them being Steven Adams, who has not been a liability this year. I was wrong on the Steven Adams trades. Grizzlies fans have been on me about it all year. I'm not saying that he's a liability. It's just stylistically, if Towns is not the version of Towns we saw in the play-in game against the Clippers, he is absolutely obliterating everybody in his path. And the versatility he gives you from the outside in, I do think it would at least be tempting to lean more heavily than you have this season on Triple J at the 5 lineups. I'm just curious as to your thoughts on there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that throughout the course of the game. I'm guessing they stick with the two bigs to start Jaren Jackson on Towns and then hide Steven Adams on Vando, who is just not a 3-point threat at all. Probably have him like sag halfway between the 3-point line and Vando's hanging out there, which I don't even know if he is. I think you could probably just completely ignore him if he is, because he's such a non-threat from that area, and then just have Steven Adams camping out close to the basket. Because I do think, I don't know if Jaren Jackson has the size to contend with Towns if he's posting up.
Right.
But, I mean, he is far more versatile defensively, and if he's out on the perimeter, that's exactly where you want Jaren Jackson to be guarding him. And, we saw the Clippers had a lot of success with smaller guys on Towns. Like, they really frustrated him with like their nonstop bevy of 6'8" to 6'9" wings. So, the Grizzlies don't have a ton of options on that front, but like maybe we do see a little bit of, I don't know, Kyle Anderson guarding Towns at times, just throwing him different looks. I would be surprised if we see a lot of Steven Adams on him, because that feels like that's one where you're just going to try to draw him out, space Towns to the perimeter and draw Adams out away from the basket.
Yeah, I could see even like a Brandon Clark or maybe depends on whether they're going to play him, but I could see them like trying a Zaire Williams on Towns.
Yeah,
if they wanted to as well.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Did you say?
I was gonna. They have options, and I think one thing that's been really great, and one reason that Taylor Jenkins finds himself in the Coach of the Year conversation, is that they haven't been afraid to experiment this season. So, I think, this isn't going to be a major coaching mismatch on either side. I think both guys have been pretty creative with their usage and their personnel distribution this year. I think this is going to be one of the more entertaining first round series.
Yeah, and as we're going through it, I'm almost less sure of what I thought would be just inevitability from the Grizzlies because you really dig into the details of Minnesota's offense. 4th in half court offense since the trade deadline. Anthony Edwards has like a step back 3 in his arsenal now, and he is so strong once he gets going downhill. D'Angelo Russell, is people have mentioned this already, but he has quietly had like a great season. I know you look at his numbers and it doesn't feel that way, but he just feels like a player who has leveled up his IQ and his ability to scale his skill set into all these different types of lineups. And that could, in theory, like the way that Memphis defends, it's not really built on individuality in any way. That they have Dylan Brooks. So it's just Dylan Brooks, you go chase one of those guys around at any given point. But then it's, how do you divvy up those assignments? Like, who is it? Desmond Bane then is going to get the other one? Who are we seeing? Like, who are the two most important defenders for the Grizzlies in this series on the perimeter? Because we know Jaren Jackson Jr. in the Defensive Player of the Year discussion, he made my all defense first team. Who's the second most important defender for Memphis this series?
I mean, just in terms of how often, or like in terms of minutes distribution, it's probably going to be Desmond Bane. But I think, DeAnthony Melton's probably going to get some time on probably more Russell than Edwards. I mean, the problem for really both of those guys is that like Edwards is 6'4", but he is big and strong.
Like 6'8" when he
yeah. And then, like Russell is, not nearly as, he's 6'4" as well, but he's not nearly as big. So I think Melton has a much better chance against Russell than he does Edwards. And we saw, a couple of years ago in that Nets Sixers first round series, like Ben Simmons just completely erased D'Angelo Russell from existence. So I think there is some concern about that, but I don't know that the Grizzlies have someone who could, like maybe Zaire Williams on Russell at times. Like it's it's just going to be so interesting to see how they deploy their personnel and who matches up with who, because they have so many options. And like, yeah, I mean, I think if when they start off, I'm going to guess it'll be Brooks on Edwards, probably Bane on Russell, and then Ja on Beverly, just because you're not super afraid of Patrick Beverly offensively. And that maybe is a way for Ja to preserve more of his energy for offense. But then, yeah, once you start, bringing in some of these bench guys, like everything goes out the window. Who knows? You're going to see a lot of cross matching, I think.
I'm curious. I feel like the Grizzlies might see an opportunity to use in certain spots, or won't be afraid to put Desmond Bane or Ja Morant on D'Angelo Russell, just because he doesn't play at like hyperspeed.
Yeah.
And they have the requisite personnel to where if you want to attack those guys off screens, I think Desmond Bane's gotten better there. And so has Ja Morant ever since his first injury came back. He's been better there as well, where it's more workable. Whereas if you put them on Anthony Edwards, then yeah, that would be the issue. And so I'd agree with your sentiments there as well. This is on the flip side of this series. Can you guess who spent the most time defending Ja Morant in the entire league this year?
Ooh. Well, I would hope for the Timberwolves' sake, it was Patrick Beverly.
It was. I kind of gave it away
good.
there, but yeah. I found it interesting just because Patrick Beverly missed so much time this year, but yet he played in all 4 games against Grizzlies. This is an imperfect stat. I am at least using the team performance. The Grizzlies averaged 1.03 points per possession when Patrick Beverly was tracked as the primary defender on Ja Morant. The only thing I can say here is there's the legend of Patrick Beverly, there's the hatred of Patrick Beverly, and then there's the truth, like somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm praying for Ja Morant's knees to be okay, because this is just someone who is all over the place. I'm not even trying to like harken back to the Russell Westbrook trying to call a timeout thing in 2013 and Patrick Beverly goes after him. Yeah. He just plays such a physical style of defense. We've seen Morant like have just dealt with a knee sprain. Did he not? Unless I'm misremembering the injury there. That's not actually like a factor I'm thinking about leading into this series, but that is probably, to me, the most important individual matchup, just because if Patrick Beverly does make life difficult on Morant to where he's not hitting his shots or getting to his usual spots, or just not getting the ball or deferring entirely, that really compromises the state of Memphis's offense, because I know they've been really good without him, but there's a difference between like Tyus Jones, game manager, never turning the ball over, and then Ja Morant, someone who can create something out of nothing from anywhere on the floor.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that opens the door to an upset. If Beverly, I'm not going to say he's going to like break even with Ja, because I think Ja's still going to get his, but if he can keep him to a relatively inefficient night, if he can prevent him from exploding to the basket the way he usually does, it's going to reduce the strain on Towns as the last line of defense too, especially if I'm guessing when Adams is in, he can guard Adams and you can put Vando on JJJ, but if they're doing these JJJ at the 5 lineups, Towns is going to have to drift out to the perimeter to guard him. And then if Ja is on the other side of the court and is exploding the basket, there's not going to be enough time to recover. So there will be a lot of responsibility on Patrick Beverly, but if we know Patrick Beverly, he's certainly going to, I don't know if he's going to like meet the challenge, but he's going to be up for the challenge.
My final question on this is, who is more important to the Timberwolves in this specific series, Jared Vanderbilt or Jaden McDaniels?
Ooh, man, that's tough. I mean, Vando, I'm assuming will continue starting, but I mean, again, like the depth of Memphis has been one of the biggest selling points this season, as you just mentioned, especially when Ja was out. Like they just didn't miss a beat here. Whereas the Timberwolves have, they can go 8 or 9 deep, but like you don't feel super great about it. So if Vando, I mean, he's not going to stretch the floor at all. But if he's such a non-factor offensively that they can hide Steven Adams on him and get away with it, I think that's going to be an issue for the Timberwolves starting group. So for that reason, I lean Vando, but I mean, McDaniels is going to be a big piece off the bench. Like if they can't hold their own in the, bench plus starters minutes, or like once they get some of the starters off the floor, that's when Memphis can really start to expand the lead. Like if the Timberwolves and Grizzlies starters play relatively even, Memphis's depth, I think, is one area where, that's late first, early second, late third, early fourth quarter. That's when they can start to break some games open.
I'm with Jared Vanderbilt as well, who's my X factor for this series, if only because you mentioned that the Timberwolves have struggled on the defensive glass. We know what Memphis does on the offensive glass. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to tip the scales, or at least even out those scales in your favor, they need Vanderbilt more than they do Jaden McDaniels. And I think the Grizzlies will play Steve Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr. enough to where it makes sense to have Vanderbilt on the court. If they go to a one big lineup, or just a Jaren Jackson Jr. and any other big lineup, yeah, you could think about maybe trying to get away with Jaden McDaniels more. But I think if the Grizzlies had like a point of attack wing, like a Paul George, and we saw Jaden McDaniels get time on him in the playing game, then yeah, Jaden McDaniels is more important there. But he would be he's actually my biggest X factor on the Wolves. I flirted with Malik Beasley a little bit, and it's not that I couldn't talk myself into him mattering as much in this series. It's more so just like, it's not, if he wants to break up some of the Memphis bench heavy units, but rotation shortened. So I'm not sure how much of like that responsibility is going to fall on him, or how much of the heavier bench units we're going to see for Memphis in the playoffs. And so I kept just coming back to like D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards are going to dictate all the terms on the perimeter for Minnesota. Who was your X factor for this team?
I mean, Beverly is the obvious one for the defense against Ja, but honestly, it might be D'Angelo Russell. You brought him up earlier. Like, he's quietly had a very good, steady season for them. And, when Towns was struggling to the extent that he did against the Clippers, like, here he is with 29 points to help bail them out along with Anthony Edwards. So, assuming that Brooks is on Edwards, if Brooks can help limit Edwards' effectiveness, we'll see how Towns fares against the double bigs, or against, whichever guy is end up guarding him for most of this series. If D'Angelo Russell can win his individual matchup, I think that opens the door for a Minnesota upset.
Who's your X factor for Memphis?
Can I pick like any of their entire bench? Is that allowed? Probably Melton. I mean, he's just been so effing good, and it makes me mad that they have so many capable ball handlers. But again, if he's, if he winds up getting some of the Russell defensive minutes and can help like actually win that matchup, and then is still going to be, a guy who can run the offense whenever Ja's off the floor, never turn the ball over, which is going to be important against a Timberwolves team that likes to force a bunch of turnovers. If he's knocking down outside shots whenever, someone's passing it to him, I think that's probably my call there. What about you?
I'm going with Desmond Bane, because I think there are two instances for me. You're playing with Ja, you're in the Grizzlies' best lineup. If they take the ball out of his hands, or if he just doesn't have it going, like someone else aside from Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to need to make plays with the ball. I think he's probably best equipped, or the one that's most likely going to fall to in this series. And then the other thing is, like, if we see that the Grizzlies want to get away with some of their bench heavier rotations, especially when you look at their perimeter personnel, just having him next to Tyus Jones, he's mission critical, in my opinion, to keeping then those lineups afloat where, Ja's not on the court and Jaren Jackson Jr. is. But like, if you have Tyus Jones, it's just different from having Ja Morant there. And perhaps Dylan Brooks fancies himself everything that I'm talking about right now. I just think that Desmond Bane is more equipped to do it. And just given the year he had, like, he petered out a little bit in the middle of the year and then like came on strong after that again. But I feel like he's just going to be so important to the state of this team's half court offense, both with and without Ja on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, they were low volume, middling efficiency 3-point shooting team. And, he was the one very lone exception to that, with shooting 43.6% on almost 7 3-point attempts per game. So if shots aren't falling for him, the Grizzlies could find themselves in a bit of a math problem.
What is your prediction for Grizzlies, Tim? I talked myself into this being a closer series than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mort and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago when it started to seem like these two teams might meet one another. And we're like, man, this series is actually could be really, really fun. I lean Grizzlies in 6, but I don't feel particularly strong about it. Like I don't think it's going to be a sweep either way, but I could see Grizzlies in 5. I could see 6. I could see 7, or I could see a Timberwolves upset. So I think a lot depends on, Ja missed a ton of time late in the year. He did come back for the final regular season games, but as you mentioned, can he stay healthy? Is he fully 100% at this point, especially dealing with a past Lake Beverly? And then, like how do each of these teams handle the individual matchup problems that the other poses? There's a lot of variance in this series, I think.
I'm going Grizzlies in 6 as well, but I'm where you're at right now. I went into this discussion and in my notes of the Google Doc, Grizzlies in 5. Like I just thought people were reading the Timberwolves. I don't know if I'm reading too much into what they showed against the Clippers after Towns fouled out.
Yeah.
But you start to dig into the individual matchups, and it's just my huge question of how does Memphis's offense translate to the postseason still looms. I'm picking them anyway. Maybe that's an insult to Karl Anthony Towns. I hate 1-game referendums in the NBA because there are so many games, but like he did not do himself any favors in that the Clippers playing game. But you also have to assume that his default is going to be closer to his world beating performances for most of this season than anything drastic there. And so like if Karl Anthony Towns is having a huge series, you have Jaren Jackson Jr., but like I don't necessarily know what Memphis's answer is to that. Like when you go to the top of the roster, Minnesota between Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, and Karl Anthony Towns just has a lot more overall offensive talent. So one of my most intriguing series that I thought initially that the Grizzlies were just going to roll through